everyone. Welcome to episode 32 of Takeaways. My name is Patrick Searcy. I'm Director of Marketing for ALN Apartment Data, and I'm joined by the actual star of the show here, Jordan Brooks, Senior Market Analyst. How are you, Jordan?
I'm great, Patrick. How about you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for asking. I know you have a really busy, probably 4 or 5 weeks coming up here, lots of travel. Going to take a little bit of time off, so I'm excited for you, but I get to see you in mid-April in Fort Worth for the Texas Apartment Association. You have a presentation coming up. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but let's hop in here. We're going to start by talking about the article from the March newsletter. It's called Exploring Differences Between Gateway and Sunbelt Performance. So the basic perspective from this article was Gateway versus Sunbelt. Were there any markets or elements of the analysis that didn't really easily fit into that?
I would say that Houston and Miami jump out a bit just because, a case could be made for those two markets that you could put them really in either category or both. Miami is generally considered a gateway market. It's also in the Sun Belt just regionally. And then Houston, similarly, it's not as often considered a gateway market, although in some places you do see that. And it could qualify just on the basis of the international trade that goes on there. But it's also geographically in the Sun Belt. So that was one that was a little bit odd. I ended up including Miami as a gateway market and Houston as a Sun Belt market. Beyond that, I would say the two Southern California Sun Belt markets, which would be San Diego and San Bernardino Riverside. Those were interesting too, because they looked more like gateway markets from a recent deliveries perspective, especially. Which, really isn't a surprise, but it certainly kind of stood out in the data. But so, there were kind of some points of strangeness in those categories.
Well, one of the differences you mentioned multiple times throughout the article is the new supply situation between Gateway and Sunbelt markets. When you adjust for size, recent deliveries for both groups kind of looked similar. Can you unpack that a little bit and what that adjustment entailed, and then maybe explain why you see this as a significant differentiator between those groups?
Well, the adjustment that we used in the newsletter was basically to take recently delivered units and just calculate that as a percentage of existing stock, whether that was at the market level or for the group overall of either Sunbelt markets or gateway markets. And so kind of putting it in that percentage form allows for, I think, more context when we're comparing between markets or between groups of markets. As you mentioned, when that calculation was done, for the group of gateway markets over the last 3 months, new delivered units was about 0.8% of existing stock. And 0.6 rather. For Sunbelt markets, it was 0.8. So not a lot of difference there, just numerically 0.6, 0.8. But of course, for one, we're looking at a small period of time, 3 months, and so that is going to both reduce the variance and reduce the magnitude of the numbers we're talking about. And the reason we did that just in general was because there has been a lot of change going on in more recent months. The 12-month numbers are kind of obscuring some of the 6 and 3 month numbers. And also because that's been sort of the winter period over the last 3 months. But sort of within the groups, within the gateway group and within the Sunbelt group, there were some fairly dramatic differences. And so, for example, in the gateway group, the highest markets by that metric were Boston, Chicago, and Miami. And recent deliveries in those markets equaled 0.8% of existing stock in those markets. For Sunbelt markets, the leaders ranged from 1.5% to 2.5%, so significantly higher relative to the gateway leaders, you could say. And really, that difference between the Sunbelt and gateway markets as a group would have been larger if not for those two Southern California Sunbelt markets that had very, very low recent supply as a share of existing stock. So that drove the Sunbelt average down somewhat. So I do think certainly this wasn't really part of the newsletter purview. This was more a look back at the last 3 months, but as we look forward to the rest of 2023, new supply in general is going to be one of those main factors that we're watching. We're expecting a lot of new supply in the Sun Belt, particularly And some of those kind of high growth markets in the Sun Belt, Nashville, Raleigh-Durham, Austin, Orlando, that are going to see a really high level of new supply. That's sort of joining with the lower demand that we're seeing. And so that's why in the newsletter, when we talked about the difference in occupancy performance in recent months, the gateway markets have overperformed the Sunbelt markets because they're not dealing with the same volume of new supply, even if they are dealing with similar situations on the demand front.
Well, I kind of teased it on the outset of this conversation about what you have coming up here. I know you'll be in Texas again. So talk to us about some upcoming events that you'll be speaking and what we can expect from you over the next probably 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks or so.
Yeah, so March 23rd, I'll actually be doing a virtual presentation for the Virginia Apartment Association, and it's going to be really dealing with the Roanoke area specifically. And again, that'll be virtual and March 23rd. So details on that will be on our social media channels. April 19th, as you have already mentioned, I'll be doing a session at TAA. If memory serves, it's called Texas versus Everybody, a little play on the song title. And the idea there is just going to be kind of diving into what has made Texas such an engine of growth for multifamily relative to even other areas of the country that have been performing well in recent years. And then April 26th, just after that, I'll be in Raleigh for the Apartment Association of North Carolina's annual conference and trade show, and I'll be doing a session there as well. So that's kind of what's coming up in the next 5 or 6 weeks.
I'm looking forward to seeing you speak. I'm looking forward to getting to spend some time with you too. You mentioned it. We're going to put stuff out on our social media, so you can look for us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and Instagram. Search for ALN Apartment Data. Don't forget to hit that like button and hit the subscribe and notification bell so that you don't miss any of our new content on YouTube as well. Jordan, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Always a pleasure to chat with you, and we'll talk hopefully very soon.
You too, Patrick. Thank you. See you soon.